Well, we're going to go ahead and begin and come out of recess. And we have two final agencies that we want to hear from, and that's the Board of Municipal and Zoning Appeals and also the Office of Equity and Civil Rights. And I am Vice President Sharon Green Middleton, and also representing the 6th District. And just to review those that have come out of recess and are present. So we have Ryan Dorsey of the 3rd District, and also Odette Ramos of the 14th District.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And to my right, we have Felicia Porter of the 10th District.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And so we're going to start with the Board of Municipal and Zoning Appeals, and I'm sure you have a presentation first, so you can probably start by introducing yourself and your team, and then you can get right into your presentation.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Becky Witt. I'm the Executive Director of the BMZA. To my right is Jim Ullman, who's the Assistant Counsel to the BMZA. And behind me are 2 board members from the BMZA, Liz Cornish and Leland Shelton. I think that's everybody from our tiny little team here today. Thank you for having us this afternoon as your second to last hearing of this budget season. I'm not sure how to work this, sorry. Oh, here we go. All right, so BMZA, as you all are, I think, familiar with us, we're a quasi-judicial agency, which means we hold administrative hearings where we apply the law to the appeals that are filed with our office. So quasi-judicial just means we're similar to a court in many ways, including the tasks that we have to complete. We have to apply the law to the facts in front of us, but the board members are not judges, and the setting is a lot less formal than a courtroom. The rules of evidence are very relaxed. And so as you know, it's important that we apply the law consistently to each and every case, which is what we've really been trying hard to be doing, especially since the beginning of 2023. So our goals for next year, there are 2 main goals. The first one is to reduce the number of days between the filing date of an appeal and its public hearing date. There are a lot of things that go into that number. Some are within our control, others are not, including how many cases have been filed. That's not really within our control. How restrictive the zoning code is. Yesterday, Eric Tiso testified about how we used to get 1,000 appeals a year, and now we get about 300 or so after Transform. Right now, we're at 157 cases this year so far, but it kind of waxes and wanes over the course of the year, depending on the time of year, interest rates, all kinds of things. One big factor that was within our control in the past couple of years that did lead to an increase in the number of days between the filing date and the hearing date is that we're being a lot more careful about making sure that applications are fully complete before we schedule them. So in the past, we used to get an application, put it on the docket, and try to make it complete by the time the hearing date came around, which was a little stressful, I think, for staff. It was also stressful for community members who wanted to see a complete file, but maybe it wasn't complete. And so what we've been doing, especially since the beginning of 2023, is requiring completeness before we schedule a case. So that has added to the amount of time between the quote unquote filing date and the hearing date a little bit. One major thing that we've required now that we didn't used to require, even though it's been in our rules for at least since 2016, is that the applicant has to give us a written statement that describes how their project complies with the zoning code. And that's one of the requirements in the application process that applicants sometimes do have trouble creating, especially ones that don't have attorneys representing them. So it takes a little bit of time for them sometimes to come up with their statement of justification for their variance, which includes uniqueness, practical difficulty, and all that kind of thing that we talked about already. The second big goal is to increase the transparency and efficiency and fairness of the alley and footway appeal process. This is something we've been working on a lot this past year and has required some interagency cooperation. You might not even know that BMZA hears appeals from DOT's alley and footway assessments. And so it's required interagency cooperation between BMZA, DOT, the law department. Councilman Dorsey's been involved in helping us get this organized. Finance might need to be pulled in. There's a lot going on here, and this is a process that maybe hasn't been working very well for a long time. And sometimes you have to kind of grind things to a halt before you can get them started in the right direction. So I'm happy to go into that a little bit more if people have questions about that process. So performance measures to highlight. Oh, this is not an interesting slide. Okay. Percentage of appeals upheld by judicial review has stayed pretty steady around 70 to 75%, which is about where we want it to be. Obviously, we would love it to be 100%, but 70 to 75% is about right, and that's about where it stayed. And then the second performance measure is average number of days from the hearing to a written resolution. Our actual number was 29 days. Our target is 30 days. I am actually hoping to see it move down from 30 days closer to 2 weeks, because our current practice, now that we have an assistant counsel who is not me, is that we have a set of hearings on one day, and then the board reviews and approves the resolutions at the next docket, which is usually 2 weeks later. So I would like to see that number come down from 30 days to about 2 weeks, somewhere in between there. I think that is it in terms of my introduction to the agency and what we've been up to in the past year, and I'm happy to take questions from anyone. And I will try to give my fellow BMZA folks a chance to respond to if they would like to.
Sure, of course. And for the committee, we're sticking to our one question rule as we have been throughout the hearings. And we'll start from this end. Councilman Dorsey, did you want to start with, you have a
Sure,
question?
thanks. How long can I take if I don't ask any questions? Doesn't work that way? Oh, I'm gonna press my luck
You have
anyway.
1 minute to make your
I'm just here to tell
decision.
you how great you are, and that I wouldn't be here if you weren't so great, because I only show up for nice hearings. No, the work we've done on the sidewalks has been great. I think we're all going to get, we here on this side of the table are going to get a lot less constituent complaints about sidewalks in the coming year or two, because, and going forward in general, because Becky has been really, really clear in setting expectations with the Department of Transportation about what they need to send out in order for people to be afforded their legal due process. So going forward, when the Department of Transportation notifies a resident or property owner of their sidewalk being in derelict condition and the need for it to be replaced, DOT is now very clear about the need for them to send certified mail to that effect, and for DOT to issue all of the proper notices and correspondence in writing in order to make sure that there's a clear record, so that if a person at any point appeals the violation, that DOT knows that if they can't produce all of the required documentation, BMZA is just going to not hear it and grant the people the appeal, and that's it. And that's the end of it. DOT will just not be given a leg to stand on if they don't have the proper documentation. And that's exactly the way it should be, and that's because of Becky's leadership. And that's how we got to having a bill that we just passed out of committee here 2 weeks ago, improving a lot of other process stuff related to sidewalk violations and notices, and that's all because Becky has just done great work and been a great partner, and I'm just so thankful that she's here and serving the people of Baltimore City. So thanks.
Becky, did you want to add anything to what the councilman just said?
I am great. Thank you, Councilman Dorsey. I don't think so. I kind of inherited. I'll give some credit to Katie Byrne, who is my predecessor. She had been pulled over from DHCD to be in charge of BMZA and also do her former DHCD job at the same time. I think we burned her out a little bit in asking her to do 2 jobs at the same time. But when she came over to BMZA and saw how BMZA had been running, well, how the alley and footway process had been working compared to the well-oiled machine that the violation notice process is over at DHCD, she was kind of horrified because there's just not any evidence that we had given people proper notice. And there wasn't evidence in the form of like photographs before and after of what the sidewalk looked like before, why it needed to be fixed, and then what it looked like afterwards. And so what we were doing was we were expecting these regular citizens, most of whom were elderly people. The people who file appeals tend to be people who just can't afford a random $400 charge, and they tend to be seniors on a fixed income. So we're expecting them to come in with all this evidence to say why they shouldn't have to pay, but we didn't require DOT to provide evidence of what happened and why they should have to pay, which is completely the reverse of the way it should be. And so Katie, to her, I will give her a lot of credit for really initiating this. She was like, okay, DOT, these are the steps you need to take. They didn't take them. There was a lot of back and forth, and then at some point, right before she left, she basically said, you know, we need to just bring it to a halt and say, we're gonna just approve all the appeals that you can't provide us this basic information for, because we've been asking for it for a couple years. And so that's when I took over, and I had to actually like carry out all of the things that Katie had kind of put in motion. So, and we've been, you know, with Councilman Dorsey's help, with the law department's help and DOT, we've made a lot of changes to the notices, to the BMZA process, to the alley and footway form that we give to people to fill out and submit to us. So it's kind of like, the way I think about it is like when you have a really messy closet and you just have to rip everything out and start over with a fresh slate. That's what we've been doing.
Thank you. Thank you for that detailed information and that success. And as we continue to work with DOT on their community engagement, because that's what this sounds like this was a failure in as well with DOT, and we're still trying to help in other ways for our residents as far as community engagement is involved. So thank you for that. Any other question? Oh, we'll go ahead and move to Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks also for the incredible detail. When I ask a question, you give me a lot of detail. I'm able to, and it's actually in not legal speak, it's in English, which is wonderful, so that we can figure out what's the next step for residents. Because sometimes, like in the case we just had this week, or last week, you know, one way that they were thinking about it is probably not the, you know, just to try to get a wide range of options for our residents and our businesses. So I appreciate it. I've learned a lot. Of course, my predecessor was expert in this field. She still is, but she's not in this position. And so, so thank you for that. Councilman, I hope you don't mind that I asked this question. You had brought it up before about the need for interpreters. And I was curious if you've engaged MEMA, if you've started that process, and how can we be helpful in that for you?
Yeah, and I'll try to remind myself to let other people chime in if they want to. But so we do, I won't say often, from time to time we get somebody who is an appellant who does not speak English as their primary language, and usually what happens is we don't know that ahead of time, although now all right, I'll answer your question. I have reached out, I did reach out actually to Mima about a year or so ago about getting just a connection to a translation service for a hearing, and did not hear back from them at that point. Usually people do bring in a friend or a relative to help them kind of work through their hearing. But what I think we all have found is that just because, and this is probably obvious to people who work in this area, but just because a person knows 2 languages does not mean that they know how to effectively translate back and forth, especially it's very complicated. And so what usually, especially when there's jargon involved, zoning jargon, and usually what ends up happening is the 2 people speaking the language that is not English end up like talking back and forth with each other, and the board is a little confused. Anyway, we need translation services. And so they did reach out to me after their hearing when Councilman Dorsey brought it up. And I have a meeting scheduled with them for next week. So I'm hoping that in the future, we can have something on our application or something that says like, I need translation services, and then we can have that set up ahead of time for them.
Well, it's my understanding that we, the city, are in the process of making sure that all of our web-based and paper is translated. And so hopefully you can work with Mima on that, because they're the ones working to do that. And that way you can have, you know, if you need a translator in that. And we translate in the 5 major languages, but I would imagine that the biggest one right now is Spanish for you, and for most of our agencies, frankly. And I do think that this is a challenge that I'm going to work with Mima on anyway, not just with your agency, but just the technical piece around city government speak, right? And zoning speak and legislative speak and how that works. And we had 2 hearings here with translators, and that was one of the challenges. So hopefully we can actually get not just a service, but actually, you know, translators in city government. That would be helpful in those regards and for public meetings and that kind of thing. So I think that's kind of where I'm thinking about this.
Yeah, definitely. We are blessed enough to have one of our staff members in our office, her first language is Spanish, so she is able to communicate with people who speak Spanish as their first language too, which is incredible.
That's really the best solution, frankly, to be able to have someone in your office who's Latina. So that's amazing. So thank you. Thanks for all you do. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you to the board members as well. I know you spend a lot of time on Tuesdays doing this work, so I really appreciate it. Thank you.
We're back to Councilman Dorsey. You have any further questions? No questions from anyone else.
No, I'll just say for the record, nobody ever comes to the BMZA except that we pass laws that make people go to the BMZA. If anybody ever has an issue where they don't want a thing to have to go to the BMZA,
We'll come to Councilman Dorsey.
Let's make laws so that people don't have to go to the BMZA. But when they do, I'm just really happy that they're having a great experience.
Councilwoman Ramos, any further questions? On that note, thank you for giving us an update, and you're now in recess.